This is my grandfather. The resemblance, of course, is striking. His name was Julian. He died a miserable death, unknown. This is my grandmother. Again, striking resemblance, do you not agree? She too died an unknown, but my mother, my mother, you will see, clearly from out of the family, the shape of the cheekbones, the hole in the head, very indicative of how she died. It is my father, after which I take my physical form, my father giving me his essence so that I might carry on the family dream. Father, come to me, father. And here he is, my father. The nose, the mouth. When he was alive, he had hair. But it is because of my father that I must continue his pursuits to take over the world so that I might raise my family and be united with them again.
Hello and welcome to today's show. My name is Guy and you're watching How to Be a Great Player. Today we're going to start asking some questions about your character's backstory. Now these are the 6 questions that I believe will absolutely define your character. Now if you did watch this episode on the other channel, it's the Great GM Live Sessions, then you're going to find a little bit of insight here as we've expanded upon our original ideas. And if you haven't watched that other episode, stick with us, we've got you covered. So when we're talking about backgrounds, when we're talking about origin stories, we're talking about the past, but we're also talking about the future. Now, how can you predict the future for your character before you've even created your character? Well, there's all kinds of things that we can make sure we include in our backstories, which will certainly influence the future of our character. We're going to unpack origin. What is the origin of your character? We're going to unpack the past, and we're going to unpack their future. So stick with us as we go through those. Now, today I will be using you as the pronoun in terms of, well, you are doing this, you are doing that. And I would suggest that when you're creating your characters that you do the same. Why do I do that? Why do I say use the you or the I? I did this, I went and did that, I went and did the next thing. For some people that might be uncomfortable because some of the questions are quite personal. For others, it will certainly help you to get inside the head of your character. Whenever you're creating a character, if you use the word I, in this case, I did this, I did that, it tends to make it a little bit more real, a little bit more tangible in your mind. I went for a walk in the forest. That's a generic statement. I went for a walk in the forest and saw orcs. Well, now my brain starts to put together imagery of me walking in a forest, which I may have done in real life, and then it adds in the orcs, which is not impossible for the brain to make that small leap. So what it does is it makes it feel more real. That's the basic idea anyway. So just be aware of that when you are writing a character. Rather than say they did this, they did that, he went there, she went there, together they did this. I went there. I did this with my friends. It helps make the character come alive. It really does. So give it a try if you haven't done that before. Now, origins. Let's talk origins. Here are the 3 questions. Now, if you keep track, as in the last video, I can't count, so it's actually 7 questions we're going to be asking, but these are the fundamentals. These 2 questions here. Where were you born? And are your parents, or who are your parents, I should say, who are or were your parents? And are they still alive? That's a bonus question. That are they still alive is a bonus question. Now, I've done videos before where I have lamented that the usual answer to this question, are they alive, is no, they died horribly in a fire, or they were murdered, or I brought about their doom because I was, a demon spawn, or there's often times that we want to have the parents dead, and I have spoken at length about why that's a mistake, and why you shouldn't try and do that. So, let's go back to the first one. Where were you born? Where were you born? That's a very complicated question to ask, and it's one that a lot of people fail to ask and then to pursue in terms of asking. What's so important about where you were born? Well, to be perfectly frank with you, it defines almost everything about your character. And I know a lot of people say, oh, it's nurture versus nature. Nature doesn't really care where you're born to a large degree. It's all about how you were nurtured, how you were raised. Yes, that's absolutely valid. I also think, however, that nature is also entirely valid as well. So let's unpack this simple question. Where were you born? Let's say that you're creating a dwarf, and the dwarf was born in a mine underground. We're going for a typical cliched dwarven background. Okay, that's part of answering where you were born, but if I said to you, where were you born, you might dismiss it and say, well, I was born in the USA. Okay, where in the USA? You were born in a mine. Okay, where was that mine? What mountain range was it? Was it on the southern continent, the northern continent? Was it in the Arctic? Was it in the middle of the desert? Where you were born is incredibly important to be very, very specific. The more specific you can be, the more detail automatically gets added to your character backstory. So just by answering this one question, you're getting almost a paragraph's worth of information, which you don't really have to think about too much. So, you were born in a mine shaft in the Durag Mountains, which are far to the north in the wasteland areas of Jugal. Oh, the Durag Mountains. Let's unpack those a little bit. Talk to me about the Durag Mountains. Are they cold? Are they harsh? What type of rock is it? Is it heavy, ancient dolerite rock, which is very difficult to mine through? Is it shale? Is it sandstone? Let's explore that a little bit. The Durag Mountains are a tough, harsh environment. Where does this information come from? Your GM. Ask your GM, hey, where can I get information on these mountains? What would talk to me about these mountains? I want my dwarf to come from a mountain range where there's dwarves, and he can say, well, Durag Mountains is a good place to go. You go, okay, great, I want Durag Mountains. If the mountains are harsh, if they're a tough environment, your character's more likely to be a tough character, someone who's hardy and who doesn't look into the finer things in life. What's the point of having a soft bed? At least you've got a roof over your head. We had to fight for every scrap of corridor we got. However that might be, put yourself into that situation. We grew up in a tough environment. It was harsh, it was cold, never very warm. Spring was fleeting and summer was a couple days, which we never really remember anyway because we were only allowed up onto the surface once a month because it was so dangerous to go up onto the surface. So we remained below ground, but we dreamed of the stars at night. All of that comes from just, where were you born? I mean, that's fantastic. You can just let your mind wander free. Try and position yourself in that space. Look at a real-world example. What happens if you were born in rural China today? What's rural China like? I don't know. Let me go and do some research on that. Let's go and have a look at what rural China is like. Is there technology? Is there, let's use the typical cliched ignorance, is there electricity? Is there running water? Yes, there is. There's all those kinds of things, and there's highways, and there's roads, and there's cars and things. But is life the same as if I was born in rural England or, let's say, rural South Africa? Very, very, very different. And the government that we are looking at is very different. The attitudes of the people are very different. Wow. All from one question. That gets spawned out. So when you're answering this, where were you born? A single line is insufficient. It's where were you born and how did that forge you? How did that make you different? How does that impact upon who you are? Very important question. Who are or were your parents? Assuming that they are dead, then it's were, and if they're alive, then it's are. This is another important, fundamental foundation question in terms of your character. Your parents were poor. Okay, so then your character has probably has probably grown up with the mentality of saving everything. Everything has value. Nothing is thrown away. Everything is recycled. Everything is repurposed. If you're poor, that's what you do. Trust me, I know. You try and make the most out of anything that you get, and you don't waste any money on frivolity. If you were born into a lavish, rich lifestyle, then you don't give a damn. You don't care about costs. You don't even think about how things get done. There's no resourcefulness because you don't need to be. They're all the resources you could possibly want. So when you look at who are your parents, financial situations come into play. Then position within the kingdom comes into play, or position within the galaxy comes into play. Were they captains? Were they admirals? Were they unknowns? Were they scientists? Were they colonialists? Were they missionaries? Interesting ways in which you can look at your parents and then decide how do they influence you. If I look at my parents, one was a teacher, an art teacher specifically, and so I grew up with lots of art stuff going on, lots of handicrafts. If you want custom-made Christmas wrapping paper made out of potato, I'm your man. On the other hand, my father was always trying to raise money to pay for the family to survive, and so I didn't really know him. And as a result, didn't get all that sports stuff and that kind of thing. So if you want somebody to catch a ball, best you throw it to someone who's actually capable of doing that. Again, small little details which start to make your character come alive and start to feel almost real. Almost real. That's the important thing, is they're not real, but they are almost real. Once you've answered the question about your parents in terms of what they did and the ramifications that you would have had as a result of growing up in that kind of environment, you can then answer this question, are they still alive? Now, I've done a whole video on why they should still be alive and why they should still be kicking. It gives you as the player so much more opportunity, so much more interesting factor. Hey, if your parents are still alive, and if mummy is an important person within the court, well, maybe there's someone that you can go to for help. Maybe there's someone that you can go to for information. Building in parents who are still alive is, as far as I'm concerned, a tactical advantage if nothing else. Well, if you go to your parents and you say, we need accommodation for a week, mummy, we have nowhere else to go, more than likely the mother will say, no, come in, dear, come in, absolutely, you and your friends. I do wish you'd have better friends, they're such a bad influence on you, but all of you are welcome, come in nonetheless, yes, yes, yes. No, the mud on the floor's absolutely fine, I'll just scrub it out over the next few weeks, it's not a problem, I like cleaning. Yes, oh, you're going to eat everything in the house, no, that's fine, good, yeah, sorry, I might be projecting here. Anyway, the idea is that you want to use your parents for narrative reasons, for tactical reasons, for supply, for information. There's a whole worth of stuff that comes with living relatives rather than with dead ones. Dead ones give you a bit of a cliched backstory, and I think it's a weak solution. And you're going to see, we're going to ask a question a little bit later on that's going to hopefully solve that conundrum for you if you are the one who automatically has dead parents. So let's go to the next point here, possibly. Past. Now, this defines your character in more ways than where you were born and who your parents were. That is, what were they doing before session 1 and why did they leave? What were they doing before session 1? Why is that important to know? You might have a session 0, so then it would be what would they be doing before session 0. What was your character doing just before they decided, hey, I'm going to go on wild adventures? If you're playing in a sci-fi campaign and you're a member of a crew, oftentimes you didn't have much of a choice. The ship went into battle and you were dragged along with it. If, however, you are starting off as just that little character in a tavern somewhere, dear Lord, please not, but if you are starting off as that character who just stumbles into adventure, or you're a womp rat shooter who lives on the back end of a planet in the back end of space, or you're a peasant in a field trying to cover yourself in mud to make sure that you don't get mistaken for a noble. Whatever it is that you're doing, however it is that you're doing it, why or what, no, let's start with what were you doing before you started? Now, that's a tricky question. You can't have been the head of an assassin's guild and the murderer of thousands of people if you're starting off at a low level. A lot of role-playing systems use levels to determine the experience and capacity of your character. If you are starting at a low level, it means that you haven't yet started your career of murdering millions and millions of people, or you haven't yet started your career of being the greatest assassin on Earth, who then suddenly suffers from amnesia and goes back to being a low-level character. All of that kind of stuff just doesn't hold water for me. If, however, you're starting the game where you are at higher level, maybe the character, the DM has decided, right, we're going to play level 10 characters, I want you to go and fight angels and demons. Now you are free to write the greatest story of the greatest assassin ever to have lived and have slain dragons in your sleep. You can go mad. So maybe that's what they were doing beforehand. On the other hand, if you are starting at low level, if your game doesn't have levels necessarily and you want to have the experience of someone who's a regular Joe suddenly becoming an amazing Josephine, well, this is the story that you are going to be trying to answer. What were they doing beforehand? And it's not just a case of plumber. He was a plumber before he started, slaying dragons. It might be that he was a plumber. But why was he a plumber? Well, because his parents were plumbers. Okay, so he'd taken up plumbing because Dad plumbed Mum and created him, and plumbing is in the family. Plumbing. It's a remarkable job. It's needed. Everyone needs good plumbing. Unless, of course, you are in a primitive society where it hasn't been invented yet, in which case the role of plumber might be redundant. But progressive, but redundant. So plumbing is what he was doing beforehand. Why did he not go on adventures beforehand? Well, because he had family responsibilities. Dad wasn't as good as he used to be. His piffle valve was leaking and he couldn't get a good seal and those kinds of things. So he needed a youngster to come and help him and, make sure to tighten his nuts and stuff like that. So that's exactly what my character was doing, was helping out good old Dad in the plumbing business. We were fairly successful, as a matter of fact. We were starting to make a little coin. We were middle-income individuals. Let's be honest, plumbers make a fortune. We were middle-upper-income individuals, and life was good. Life was good. Okay, great. Why'd you leave, then? Why did you give up? Why did you stop? Why did you change? Now, oftentimes in a film, we call this the point of no return. This is the point where the character irrevocably decides to go down a path, and that path will lead them to glory, fame, and fortune, or death and destruction and pain and suffering. Doesn't really matter. The point is that this is where your character decides, you know what, plumbing is actually not for me. Being elbow deep in the waste of other human beings whilst trying to fix their pipes because the idiots have tried to flush a goblin down the loo, just not for me. No, I'm going off. I'm going to go and seek my fortunes elsewhere. I think it's much more entertaining to be shot at, mauled, maimed, tortured, and otherwise destroyed with magic than being knee-deep in shit. That's pretty much the plumber's life. Or not. I mean, you've got an assistant for that, really. Anyway, why did your character leave? What's the point of your character leaving? That is something that you have to decide. And you could be, oh, well, they didn't have a choice. They stepped on a floorboard and they fell down a tunnel into a strange world. That takes choice away from them, or what it's going to do is it's going to inspire your future. So whatever you choose now, you need to make sure that your character either doesn't want to come back to this, so that's why they left, because they want to get rid of it, they want to be I don't want to be any part of it, I don't want to be like my father and mother at all, I am no longer ready to be a plumber, I want to be something else. I am leaving. Perhaps it was a fight, perhaps the parents wanted rent, perhaps they no longer wanted their son or daughter to lounge around on the couch, perhaps it was a discovery of a door in a wall and they decided to go through it one day because they were feeling miserable. Perhaps it was simply because there was an advertisement in the local newspaper saying looking for strong, tough plumber-like people to come on an adventure of aquatic magnitude. It doesn't matter. You need to decide, did they leave voluntarily or did they leave against their will? Did they leave by accident? So what are the three, one of those three combinations did they go through in order to get them to going on adventure number one? Because, okay, firstly, it's going to talk about your future. Secondly, it's going to talk about why your character stays with the party. And that is something that is very, very important and often forgotten by a lot of good players. Why your character sticks with the particular party. If they knew them as friends and you've built that into the backstory, that's fantastic. But sometimes we don't. Sometimes we go in cold turkey. So then we look to our future by answering questions about our character's past. So they have left for one of the reasons, by choice, by accident, or by other. I've gone completely blank. So they have left for one of those reasons that I listed 5 seconds ago in the video. Go look for it. I'm sorry, I'm in a good mood. Right, what did they leave behind them, however? What did they leave behind? So if they left in anger and rage, you know, they left because of emotional reasons, that's the third one. If they left because of that, what did they leave behind? Did they leave their parents behind? Yes, they did. Well, their parents are plumbers, so, well, did they leave them under good circumstances or bad circumstances? Those are questions that you've already answered. Now you can say, what did they leave behind? They left behind an inheritance, they left behind a fiancé, they left behind a vast fortune, they left behind destruction, hatred, and angst. They left all doesn't matter. What do they leave behind? Now, why is this part of the future? Why is this part of this particular category? And there's a very simple reason for that. This is stuff that your GM can start to use to help to tell your backstory better. If you left behind a dog, or you left behind your favorite cloak, or you left behind your fiancé, or you left behind whatever, the GM can now have that as a tool to say, all right, well, you get a message from your mother. Your father is incredibly ill. He unfortunately had an incident with a pipe, and it's left him unable to work. We're desperate for money. Please come back. Love, Mum. P.S. Don't bring your friends. Something along those lines. Wow, there's an adventure just waiting to happen. You need to go back and you need to respond. Now, if you left because of emotional issues, here's an opportunity for your character to explore those emotional opportunities, to unpack the anger, the angst, the frustration, the loss, the depression, those kinds of typical family issues. Or perhaps if you left on good terms, it's an emotional return to spend the last few moments that your character possibly can with your father or your mother or your grandmother or your dog or your tortoise, it doesn't matter. All of that kind of stuff. So you can then really play into that. So by deciding what you left behind, what it's also going to do is it's going to help you to decide what you want to do. Do you want to return home? Do you want to return to that space? So you accidentally left. You pulled an Alice in Wonderland and you stepped through the looking glass. It was the wormhole in space that sucked you to the other side of the galaxy. Do you want to return home? Is that your goal? Do you want to reconcile with your parents? Do you want to make sure they remain dead? What do you want? And perhaps it might be to have nothing to do with your past. That's perfectly valid as well, because you've answered all of those questions about your past. So we have this idea of this very complex character who's got a birthplace that we can see the influence on them. They've got all kinds of familial history, which again allows us to get insight into who they are and who potentially they could be, whether they are starting to emulate like their parents. Perhaps you might have the greatest barbarian, but he just can't help himself. When he sees a leaky pipe, he goes over and he fixes it quickly. He's always got a wrench on hand or in his backpack or his loincloth, wherever you might keep a wrench if you're a barbarian. There are all kinds of things that come out when you answer these kinds of questions. So when you answer what do you want, this is often the most difficult question for a player to answer. What does your character want? Oh, my character wants fame and fortune and be a hero. Well, maybe. There are a few people who want fame and fortune and to be a hero. For sure, there absolutely are. But there's more to it than that. Could it be to be loved? Could it be to be reconciled? You can think about all kinds of things. And when you start answering with the word I want to prove that there is more to me than fixing pipes. I want to prove that I'm better than my father. And I want to prove that life doesn't just have to be accepting what you are given. I want to prove all of that to my parents because they told me that I couldn't do it. Now that's an interesting thing that the character wants to prove. So many things. They want to prove all kinds of things. How are they going to do it? So what this does, this simple question, this simple question, what it does is it should help to define how your character acts during the rest of the game. They want to prove that you don't have to accept what you're given. Well, that means they might rally against villains who go, now you are where I want you. You will never escape. I will prove to you that I am not controlled by what I am given. I will fight against you. Interesting. Something to think about. So when you answer these questions honestly, and when you answer them as I generally find it's a lot easier. Sometimes you do feel a little bit like an idiot when you're doing it. You're like, well, I want to do this, I want to do that. But push through that, and you will find on the other side that you go, wow, was that me speaking? Or was that the character speaking? If it was me speaking, am I doing it in real life? Am I proving things in real life? Is that really what I feel about my parents? Interesting. Perhaps it's not about you at all, and that you are creative and you can pull these things forward and make logical decisions. Hopefully these questions will help you do just that. Let me know your thoughts down below. Do you like me revisiting some of these older topics that we spoke about in the past, bringing them to life, giving them a new twist, perhaps a new angle, adding some more information to them? Let me know. There's only one way that I can know, and that's with your comments down below. Until next time, however, I wish you and yours the happiest of playing.
We never talk anymore, Father. And Mother just lies around all day. I think she's depressed. I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. I don't subscribe to this idea that once a family is dead, they're dead. I think there's more to life than just being a bunch of bones in the ground. I really do. I think I shall ring the bell and summon up Great Aunt Tallulah. I think she'll know what to do.